Okay, so we'll start with your name and your date of birth, your place of birth, and your education.
My name is Stephen Ostafichuk, Stefan Ostafichuk. People call me Stefko. I was born in Oshawa, June 17th, 1958. My profession for 38 years has been an international researcher recruiter in the staffing business in technology and new product development.
And did you work independently or for a company?
Combination of both, but last 20 years independently.
And where did you go to public school and high school?
In Oshawa, as a kid, we went to a predominantly Ukrainian school called John F. Kennedy, which was later changed to Father Parema, who was our parish priest, which is now a high school. From there, I went to Oshawa Catholic High School, and from there to the University of Waterloo through St. Jerome's for political science and sociology.
And when did you get your BA?
I did. I'm two credits short of 2 degrees. I had a brother killed in a car accident, and I went back to the family farm, and I didn't finish my degrees.
Sorry to hear that. So, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
The family was of 6, mom and dad, 3 boys, and my younger sister. My 2 older brothers are both deceased. Gregory was born in Austria in 54. Nick was born in Toronto in 56. I was born in 58 in Oshawa, and my sister in 1960 in Oshawa. 2 older brothers are deceased.
Okay, in terms of, say, their background and their participation in the Ukrainian community, was it like similar to yours?
My eldest brother went to boarding school in York and Saskatchewan, as did my brother Nick. My brother Greg was less interested in the Ukrainian community. They both got into agriculture and farming and proceeded to grow a business. My sister and I, we were very active. We were all Simuti, we were all active. We all went to St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church. We all did Eridna Shkola. My brother and I and my sister, we finished our maturas at Yuri Lipa in Toronto. My sister and I are the 2 active ones, still ongoing in the community.
So your brothers didn't, are the 2 brothers are deceased and there's no other brother, right?
There's just myself and my sister left.
Okay.
We're down to 2 from 6.
Well, you're counting your parents.
My parents and 4 kids, yes.
Those are
2
okay.
Yeah.
So the first job that you had was?
Well, very entrepreneurial. As kids, my parents bought a farm. So my father always aspired to have a farm because in Ukrainiana and Trostianets, they had some acreage. His father was a cattle dealer and a carpenter and had an orchard. So my dad and mom in the early 60s bought a 400-acre farm, and the 3 boys, we grew the business to 1,000 acres until my brother Nick was killed in 78, and then we sold everything off in 79 and 80. He was killed in front of our house, and it was too traumatic for my parents.
Which of your parents is of Ukrainian descent?
My father, Dr. Mykola Ostafichuk.
And what is your mother's full name and maiden name?
My mother's name was Janet Evelyn Thompson with a P.
And tell me about your mother, where she was born, her occupation, maybe her interests.
My mother was born in 1929 in a small little farming town called Kerrobert, Saskatchewan. My grandfather was a child laborer, orphan who came to Canada to work. My grandmother was French Canadian by the name of Leda Turcot, and mom ended up studying nursing in Victoria. My grandparents moved to Victoria. Mom finished her education and started her nursing career in Victoria.
Okay, tell me about your grandfather, her father, again.
His name was Sam Thompson. I know very little about him because he came as a single child to work the farms in Canada. And then he joined the Canadian forces in World War I. And then after the war, he was gassed in Vimy. He ended up in Kerrobert, working at the library. And from there, they moved and retired and passed away in Victoria. I know very little about him.
Hmm. And your grandmother, how did they meet?
I have no idea. My grandmother died at a very young age because she was fostering children, and she had a young child who kicked her in the throat, when they were, tussling, and the kid, my grandmother, Turcot, died at a very young age. Years later, my grandfather remarried. So I never knew my maternal grandmother. She passed away when my mother was a teenager.
Mm-hmm. And how did your parents meet? Do you know?
Yes. My father came after the war on contract with a Canadian at the time called Indian Affairs, as on a contract as a doctor working with the Indigenous First Nations up in northern Canada, based out of Prince Rupert and then later based out of British Columbia. While Dad was in Canada, he continued his residency at a Victoria hospital, where my mother was working as a pediatric nurse, and doctor meets nurse, so then they got along.
Now, do you have a frog in your throat?
No, this is the way I sound all the time.
Okay. I didn't notice it yesterday. So they met, and then where did they get married, or where did they live?
Well, they met in Victoria. My grandfather, my dad's father and mother, so my grandparents on the Ostafichuk side lived in Prince Rupert. They ended up going back there, and then from there they got married in Edmonton. And they got married in Prince Rupert, and then from there they ended up going back to Innsbruck so my father could finish his final year of his medical studies to get his doctorate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then they ended up
coming back to Canada with my oldest brother. My brother was born as a displaced person in Innsbruck, Austria, while my dad was finishing his doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
And became a naturalized citizen when he got back to Canada. So that would have been 1953. Well, my brother was born in 54, but they went to Innsbruck in 53.
Mm-hmm. And so they got married in a Ukrainian church?
Yes, a Ukrainian church with two Ukrainian couples that my dad knew from the war, who ended up in Canada, and he had reconnected with them here.
Okay. So tell me about your father, his full name, and where he was born.
My father's full name is Dr. Nicholas Mykola Ostafichuk. His parents was Vasil and Anna Ostafichuk. All three were born in Trostianets, which at that time was under Poland, but it's in Ukraine now. And Dad was born in February 1919.
And how did he end up in Innsbruck?
In the village of Trostianets, there was a priest by the name of Dr. Otech Andriy Bandera, who was the father of Stepan Bandera. And my grandparents, my dad knew the priest very, very well. Otech Bandera got my father into gymnasia and into the seminary. My father quickly transferred into medical studies at the University of Lebed at the time, which was Lviv, and was studying medicine. Finished several years of medicine when the war broke out. And prior to that, my father spent 8 years in Kolomea doing his gymnasia, and from 1939 to 1941 was a teacher through Prosvita, doing Seredna Shkola in and around Trostianets.
Mm-hmm. So, did he do any medicine in Austria?
Dad, during the war, helped as a medic with UPA. When the Germans came through, they grabbed him because he had some medical skills through his medical studies, and was basically taken on as a medic with the Germans as they were going towards Leningrad. Quickly got away, and when the Soviets were coming back, he was a medic for them for a couple of days, and he was able to get away, and helped out with UPA, and then quickly was deported to Germany with his parents as labor. So my father's career did not start until after the war, when he was finishing as in the DP camp in Austria on the American zone. My father went back to finish his med school at the University of Innsbruck, and actually started to do his medical practice as a bush doctor with Canadian government Indian Affairs. That was his contract to come to Canada. It was either that or go to Paraguay.
So he applied for that.
Some people knew him and referred him to the Canadian representatives, and because of his medical, and there's a shortage of medical staff in northern Canada, he and several other Ukrainian doctors got their contracts to come to Canada as medical staff for Indian Affairs.
Mm-hmm. And did you tell me a little bit about his parents, where they were born?
They were all three of them were born in the same salon. Dido Vasil was born in 1880, 1890, and Baba Anna was 10 years later, like 10 years younger than my Dido. But all three, plus my late uncle, who was murdered by the NKVD, all four of them were born in Trostianets. They were sitting in it.
Okay. So they lived through the Holodomor.
They never spoke about it. Our housekeeper, just on a side note, our housekeeper when I was growing up, because my mother ran my dad's medical practice. My father was a GP and surgeon with a very large practice. Mrs. Karpenko was born in Sumy. After she had passed away, we found out that she had lost her two children and her first husband to the Holodomor. How I got involved with the Holodomor projects was in memory of Mrs. Karpenko. So I never found out any of that until after she had passed away.
And Mrs. Karpenko is your grandmother?
No, she was our housekeeper, as we were growing up.
Okay. Yeah, because they were in Western Ukraine, right? Your parents?
My parents were, Western Ukraine. Yeah.
Right. So did you speak Ukrainian in the house, or what language was spoken?
Ukrainian was our first language for all of us. And with Mrs. Karpenko, we always spoke with her in Ukrainian right up until our teenage years. And we all went to Krinska Shkola. We all did Sum. We did all the Tansivalna stuff. We went to the St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church in Oshawa. We were very, very active in the Hamada. My father was in Craiova Prava with Sum, very active as a doctor for Tabore, both at Veselka and for Madrivny Tabore, together with my mom, and also on international jamborees. My sister and I danced into our 20s, and all the way right through university.
Wow, you were in good shape.
Yeah. Actually, the last time I danced I was 50 in Oshawa at a festival where we didn't have enough kids on stage, so I put together a parents alumni, and I picked up a gal who was a little bit on the plump side, and I spun her around thinking I broke a rib, to find out that I had a heart condition.
Oh no. Oh my.
Yeah,
What?
you can edit that part out.
Yeah. What was the dance group called?
The dance group, first of all, I'm from Oshawa, the Dnipro Hall, which is called the Dnipro Ukrainian Cultural Center, where we had Liga, Junochi Liga Sum. We had a sports team. We had a dancing group called Sokola Dancers. So over 20 years, the last 20 years, the hall was very active on a political side, but we also, the main thrust for the kids was a dance group.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in my early 20s, we had over 60 kids in different ages dancing. And when we sold the hall, we still had 20.
So you said you spoke Ukrainian, and so tell me how it was that your mother learned Ukrainian.
First of all, my mom was French English, and she was United Church by way of religion. Okay, Dido and Baba, both were alive when my parents were married. They spoke very, very little English, and mom just totally immersed herself into the community. My mother acted as a teacher's aide in Sadochuk, went through Shkola, and actually graduated her matura at Yuri Lipa as a parent. She was the oldest student in her graduating class. I've got her Haramata here. So
That was very brave of her to be in with all those kids, right?
well, my mom always had a thing about kids, and mama's nursing started off in pediatrics, right? So it was a natural thing for her.
So she did a matura, you said?
Yeah, I've got her graduating certificates.
Mm-hmm. And did she speak any English at all with you in the house?
Only when she was mad.
Oh,
No, as a policy, mom, when we were at home, mom would always, to keep practicing her Ukrainian, kept always talking in Ukrainian. And when we had guests, it was always in Ukrainian. My mother was known as Pani Ivanka. My mom's name was Janet. They either called it Pani Doktorova or Pani Ivanka. My mom was very actively involved with SUM and all the activities. My mother was, for a time, head of Junochi Liga out of Oshawa. My mom was also involved with the National Council of Women and brought in the Ukrainian organizations in the 60s into that prestigious lobby group. And one of the things that they were successfully lobbying was equal pay for equal labor. So mom was very politically active and also very supportive of the Ukrainian issues with Apple and everything else.
and she worked full time.
And she worked full time.
So she was an amazing woman.
I think that'd be an understatement.
And is she still alive?
My mother passed away 3 years ago at the age of 85. Dad died in 1979, a year after my brother was killed in 78. Dad died at the age of 60.
Mm. So, who of your family members influenced your Ukrainian identity?
Well, obviously my dad, but also my mom, because my mom always made sure that we never forgot it. And every time we had company, if there's anyone who came over who was Ukrainian, we spoke Ukrainian. And also as a kid, we had We had a priest named Father Father Gawuk, who came over in the 70s from Ukraine, and on Saturdays we were the cross that he had to bear because he came to teach us at home to improve our Ukrainian language.
Actually, I'm related to him, but I'll tell you that story later.
On a side note, I'm working with people out of the eparchy of Saskatoon on Ostafichuk, who founded Plast in Saskatoon.
Oh, really?
That's another story, and it's another project that I'm working on offline.
Okay. Did your mother cook all the Ukrainian traditional meals?
Baba taught her how to cook. The early years were kind of disastrous, but Mom was quite an exceptional cook. She couldn't bake to save her soul, but we did all the strave for Easter and the Rizdvo. And with Mrs. Karpenko, with Baba, with my maternal grandmother, she died 3 months after I was born from cancer. But Mrs. Karpenko kind of was our surrogate babcha, and she taught Mom a lot of the Ukrainian cuisine. Plus, Mom would also go to the hall because of all the banquets, because we had a very powerful community at the time. So always in the kitchen, making fereniki and holopchi, patichke, borscht, you name it. So Mom picked it up or had people teach her.
So I'm not sure whether you told me of the organizations that you belong to, but you could tell me again.
League of Ukrainian Canadians, Spilka Ukrainska Молодість, Sum, Ukrainian Youth Association. I'm somewhat of a lapsed Catholic, so but I do projects with the cemetery and with the churches. And also the family's been involved with OUN. My parents were involved with Abo N at the time. My father was a founder, or one of the founders of the Ukrainian Medical Association in Canada back in the late, early 60s, and was active in that until he passed.
But presently, which organizations are you part of?
I'm a project, I'm on Uprava for Ukrainica. I help them with research projects, special projects. I'm also on Krayova Prava for League of Ukrainian Canadians. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a Simuich, though I don't have any kids. I'm the hospodar at Camp Veselka, Dobro Vilna. So we put in a new kitchen pavilion. We just renovated our kaplitcha, and we just renovated our Olympic pool during COVID. New playgrounds being put in. Mm-hmm. I donated a low ropes course in memory of my late wife. And so I'm at the Salka as a passion. As a Taborovik, I was here 14 times, and I was on 6 different Mandrivny Tabore, and I did several Providnitsky Tabore and a couple of Zemovi Tabore, including one ski trip with Plast. Eris Tutsulak was my hresny. He took me on a Plast trip once when I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm. So for people who don't know, where is Veselka?
Veselka is a 65-year-old camp for the Ukrainian Youth Association, just slightly north and west of Toronto in Acton, Ontario. Do you want the website?
No, it's okay. Just what year was it established?
19. Okay, I suck in math. 54, 55. So we've had our 65th anniversary. So.
Okay. Yeah. Do you consider yourself religious or spiritual?
Spiritual. When God invented man, she wasn't thinking.
Thank you. Do you belong to a particular church?
My home-based church is Oshawa, St. George's Ukrainian Catholic Church, and I'm still involved there. But from a distance point of view, when I was married, I was living in Burlington. I was a regular churchgoer with my wife, late wife Adriana Naroznia, to Blessed Virgin Mary in Burlington, Ontario. And from time to time, I go to the new church in Trafalgar. But I wouldn't consider myself a regular churchgoer.
Mm-hmm. So what year did you get married?
2010, July 31st.
And what year did your wife pass away?
September 5th, 2014, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have the time and date when I met her and the time and date that she died on my wedding band. That's the only tattoos that I have. Pani Karapenko had the tattoos from the camp, and in memory of her, I've never had a tattoo. Sorry, was that a buzzkill?
Well, it's sad. It was sad. Those
Actually,
camps.
we were married 6 months when she was diagnosed terminal. We went on a 3.5-year honeymoon. No one can say they went on a 3.5-year honeymoon. Every doctor's appointment was date night, and except for the last few days, it was most wonderful. I wouldn't change anything.
Where did you go?
I'm sorry.
Where did you go?
Where did I go?
In the 3 years, did you travel?
No, that was well. We spent a lot of time at Vasalka, a lot of time in the garden, and we did. We started off with the traditional chemo and stuff, and then very quickly went to naturopathic, and we spent a lot of time in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Mexico for what they consider the progressive treatments. That kept her alive. Then the cancer came back. Went back to Princess Margaret. She had one dose of chemo, was gone 2 days later.
Mm-hmm.
So you might not want to take my opinion of the medical profession.
That's too bad. Yeah, I've had some friends recently with visiting there. So this question is, do you consider yourself Ukrainian, Ukrainian Canadian, Canadian Ukrainian, Canadian or other?
I consider myself Ukrainian with Canadian citizenship.
If somebody asks you what is your, I don't know how to phrase this, but if somebody just asked you casually, what do you consider yourself?
I say I'm Ukrainian, first generation Ukrainian.
Okay. And your siblings, what would your sister say?
My sister is the principal of St. Joseph's, a Ukrainian Catholic school in Toronto. Before that, she was a teacher at Cardinal Schlippe for many, many years. Got her master's degree and then went into vice principal and principal. She would consider herself very much Ukrainian. I'm probably more historically inclined and politically inclined and organizationally inclined. My sister's more from the educational point of view. All her kids, she has 5 kids, they all speak Ukrainian. 2 fluently, the others have kind of drifted off, and they've all married off with non-Ukrainians. So it's a traditional first generation marries within their communities, second generation marries, broadens out the gene pool.
What do you like or find helpful about the Ukrainian Canadian community?
I just find them a challenge in everything. I still don't understand the intergenerational discord between the organizations. I understand when I grew up in Oshawa, we had a lot of people, DPs who came after the war. We had General Motors in Oshawa. We had a very, very strong community around our cultural center, which was based on the Banderutsi, the Pravoslavne, where on one side of the street we had a Bukovinska Cerkva of 3 blocks down the road. Across the street we had the Katolika, and each one of them was siloed. But growing up in Oshawa, I consider myself growing up in a Ukrainian ghetto. Now, I don't mean ghetto in a negative term, but you know, if you establish your community, you establish your churches, you establish your organizations, you build your buildings. You know, your parents who just got here as DPs don't speak the language, so they hunker down amongst themselves. You know, so the roots, the Ukrainian roots came to me as post-war. My Ukrainian originally was considered Staroslavyanska. And my dialect that I was taught and people that I grew up with, a lot of people, you know, we're primarily from Western Ukraine.
How many do you think Ukrainians were there at that time when the community was really active?
In
What was,
Oshawa, where I
yeah.
grew up,
Hmm.
well, our church, St. George's, has just celebrated, I think it was its 120th year or anniversary a year or two ago. Our cemetery just celebrated its 50th anniversary. We only have 2 Ukrainian Catholic cemeteries in the Eastern Eparchy, St. Elias in Brampton, which is a new one, and ours in Oshawa, which is 51 years old now. At its height at the Dnipro Cultural Center with the 3 organizations, if I remember correctly, we had approximately 150 families in Oshawa or surrounding Oshawa who were active in our hall, in our Domilka. Our church, when I was a kid, was always jam-packed. And I think it had a seating capacity for 300 people, and it's a very large church. It was built in the 1950s with a copper banya. You can see it off of the 401. In the 70s, they built a big community hall across the street called Lviv. But the parishioners are dying off. The next generation, second and third generations, aren't coming to church. The Pravoslavna have the same issue. The Bukovinska Cerkva was sold off to the Greeks. And I still believe we have Baptista and maybe some Seventh-day Adventists still in Oshawa, but I never knew them.
So the Orthodox community was also quite large?
It was smaller than the Ukrainian Catholic one, but it was very, very strong as well. And some of our other organizations like Odum, right? We never really had Plast in Oshawa because it just never got going. Sum was a predominant one. Uno was there for a while, but some of those organizations have pretty well died off except for people of a later age like us or me.
You said at the beginning, you said the community is a challenge. Is that what you said?
I find let me give you some background. I left the community at the age of 21, 22 to get into business, and I worked overseas for several years. I had a business failure in forestry, went to Central America, spent 3.5, 4 years working through CETA, came back to Canada, and started my career as a recruiter in Toronto. I totally missed 1991. I was living with a gal, my partner, who was from Peru. So I was much more interested in the Peruvian and the Aztec and the Inca history. So basically, I call myself Piata Felia, 5th wave. Everybody knows about the 4 waves of immigration. The 5th wave is when you were born and raised in the Hromada here, and you leave for whatever reason, obraze, career, life, marriage, whatever, and then over a period of time, you find your roots and you come back. So I had a 30-year holiday from the Ukrainian community. So when I came back, I'm full of vim and vigor and ideas. I can't remember why I left. All I know is that I'm back and it's given me a sense of purpose. And when I met my wife, that just cemented it.
So when did you come back?
2007 into the community. And the reason for that was at the time they were having an anniversary banquet for our Domilka in Oshawa. And my father was the head of the hall till he died. And his picture, which I have on the wall here in the sumo outfit, was hanging in a position of esteem until we sold the hall. We were requested to come for this banquet. You know, your dad helped build this place and run this place, and you guys haven't been here. So we came back for this banquet, and it was more of a trizna than it was a celebration because the old folks wanted to sell. The issue there was if people coming from the war came out of the forest, came to General Motors, right? And every immigrant parent wants their child to become a doctor, dentist, engineer, whatever, just to be better than them. But then if you don't work in General Motors and you aspire for a career, you go to the big city. So we had a real loss of talent, loss of education, loss of manpower, population for career purposes. And so Oshawa, just if you look at Oshawa now, even though it's a booming bedroom town from an industrial point of view, automation, everything else, those jobs are gone. Same as in Hamilton. So I'm a member of SUM Hamilton. Our Sadadok is a shell of itself because, again, anybody who had career aspirations went to the big city. So we lost a lot of kids from Oshawa to Toronto, and they joined SUM in Toronto, or kids from SUM Hamilton joined SUM Etobicoke or SUM Mississauga. So some of them are still actively involved, but you had a real depopulation of the organizations. And that's strictly economics. And then you add into the fact that you start dating and marrying outside of your Haramada.
So you're part of the Oshawa Haramada, is that?
Yes, I consider myself an Oshawa Haramada. However, I spent 10 years in Hamilton and I'm in my third year at Visalka, so I'm a bit of a gypsy.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel very close to the Ukrainian Canadian community in Oshawa?
I have some lifelong friends who I hadn't seen for 30 years. When we reconnected, it was like I saw you yesterday. And several of those lifelong friends are actively involved on Directsia at Visalka with me. So there are some core people who are still very, like me, very, very actively engaged. They had children, their kids went through the whole, the Simuski Programa and all that. And so there's probably a good solid core of about 20 people who I hadn't seen in decades, who when we get together, it's very warm, and we don't talk about the good old days. We just pick up where we left off.
Mm-hmm. So what do you find helpful about the community? Or enjoyable, or?
Well, everything about the culture is totally enjoyable. I'm a history nut and a politically inquisitive person, so I'm actively involved in the organizations. The whole Demod was a passion project of mine that I've been involved with since 2008 with Ukrainica. I'm now involved with a new book that they're just publishing, so I'll be doing distribution for that. I'm the head of the Dnipro Oshawa Fund. When we sold our Domovka, we put the money in trust at the BCU Foundation, and I'm the chair of a committee that we make donations to Ukrainian projects that we find of value. So we donated to Camp Visalka, to CUF, Canada Ukraine Foundation, on the medical missions. We sponsored the latest project for PTSD, project that CUF is doing. Several other a major donation to our cemetery, where we upgraded the cemetery grounds and we put in the marble cross in memory of our Bolshu Chlena, who are Pit Zemlyu, right? And on the cross it says, Slava Bohu, Heroyam Slava. And there's several other projects that we're involved with. So both in Ukraine and in Canada.
So you mentioned Ukrainica. Did I hear that correctly? Tell me what that is exactly.
The Ukrainica Research Institute, Dr. Oleg Romanishin, Odestasiu, they also publish Home in Ukraina. So, so they publish a lot of books and literature. They did the Holodomor exhibit, which were the big posters back in 2008. If you may remember the small box, the Holodomor in the box, that was my project. I took that on and raised the funds, and we distributed it to about 150 universities and Suskin places. We've had over 500 exhibits. I also did a 9-minute video of a child's voice experiencing living through and dying through the Holodomor that was shown in Parliament Hill in Ottawa. So I'm actively involved with them.
So they operate in Toronto.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The people at the Research Institute, the people on the Holodomor projects, they know them very well. They work together. Mm-hmm. And they're also members. They're also members of Cook.
And the 9-minute video, is it 9 minutes? You said
I'll just tell you about this, just so that you know. So when one of the posters that was in this book, the Holodomor book that was done for 2008, it was all archival. Everything was factually correct, and it was put. And there's a lot of documents from Služba bezpečnosti and everything else. So they put that exhibit together. One of the posters showed a photographer named Bokan, who chronicled the demise of his family during the Holodomor. And I took that as a story, and I had a teenage boy basically recite his experience as a child living through the Holodomor. So he goes through all the different parts of the Holodomor, and to the point where he dies. And then it tells about his father and his surviving brother being sent to the Gulag, where they never came back. It's a 9-minute video for school-age kids to give them a sense of what the Holodomor was all about.
So what would you like to see different about the Ukrainian Canadian community?
That changes based on every meeting I go to. So, back in when the DPs came after, like Cook, again, every Chvelya established itself based on its own miseries and its own trials and tribulations, right? Like, when the first wave came, and then you had the internment, then you had this and that. Then once the Ukraine first and second wave kind of got established, then you had the third wave, the 25 or 30,000 Canadian or Ukrainians who came here after, from the DP camps. They're already politicized, okay? And so they always had this sense of, like when the Banderilci came in and got involved with Cook and everything else, then you had all these different factions and everything else. You think after 30 or 40 or 50 years, they would get over it. Everybody's got their own agenda. I don't see any real sense of cohesiveness. For example, Plost as Boy Scouts, people look at Sum as neo-Nazis, right? Because we were Banderilci, because we were the political, trying to get our country back. We're not so much that now, but we are more politically aware. At one point, Sum was bigger than Plost. Now Plost is doing tremendously well in Ukraine. Sum is opening up in other countries now, in Europe, because of the emigration out of Ukraine for employment. So now you're getting Ukrainian communities in Portugal and Italy, places like that. So everybody's got their own issues and agendas, and there seems to be a tension amongst the different groups on an ongoing basis. Now, being Ghetto, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, but what is that noise?
Sounded like a car running down the road.
Valeri? To uva. Um,
So,
well, do you think
well,
that the divisiveness within some of the organizations is more so now or less than it used to be?
other organizations I don't consider relevant to what I do, so I can't answer that. Where there's commonality, like the whole Demota project, um, when there's a common ground on that, that's fine. I don't involve myself with PLAST. I don't involve myself with the church organizations other than I go help make Vareniki from time to time. And I'm probably their best customer on Friday, at the church kitchen to support them financially. Um, I find there's several interests, like within Cook, that seems almost oligarchical. Um, Even Baduchny seems to have its own sense of entitlement, right? Ukrainian Credit Union doesn't deal with Baduchnis and this and that, Plast. I haven't met a Plastun since, in 20 years, other than the fact that my Hrasny donated the building, Hutsalak Center, he was my Hrasny. So there's certain irony about it. And having been away for 30 years, to go back to my Piata Chvelia analogy, I've been away from it for so long that they're not relevant to me. So I'm very passionate in what I do, and I'll focus my passion on what I can do best instead of spending time on chasing windmills. You might probably edit that out of the video.
Well, I'm just trying to get a sense because it's unusual, maybe other than myself, because I was also away from the Ukrainian community for many years, and then I made this film on Holodomor, so I kind of understand what you mean. But
what brought you back into what was the hook that brought you back into the Holodomor? Mine was because of our nanny losing her kids. And I felt guilty about it, not knowing anything. She used to wear her sweater in the middle of summer so she couldn't see her tattoos. If you never finished your food on your plate, she'd get hysterical. And she'd say, skin share, and if you didn't finish the food on your plate, she would literally get all bent out of shape. That might be your last meal, is what she always used to say.
mhm.
And and then my late wife brought me back into the Hramada, and she brought me to the Salka. I hadn't been here in over almost 40 years. And then I remembered how I loved the place. And when she took sick, she said, well, you're pretty good at raising money and doing things. Promise me 5 years. Well, I'm now into year 7. I'm in overtime.
Hmm. Well, that's nice.
So were you active in the organizations growing up as a kid? And
I wasn't necessarily active. I was part of the Ukrainian Students Club at U of T.
yeah,
I
I was a Susk at University of Waterloo, and when Moroz came out, I was involved with the Susk executive, taking him around and doing stuff, and I went to conferences with him in New York, and then
Well, you've been very active.
yeah.
Did the fact that Ukraine became independent have any influence on you?
No, because I totally missed it. I really didn't refocus into the Ukrainian stuff until about 2006 and 2007. I was very busy with my own career at the time. I didn't have any kids. I had employees. And I'm a project-oriented guy who's very self-centered in his interests. And if I have something that's of interest to me, I'll give you an example. I've been involved for 13 years in a new water treatment technology that Bill Gates invested in us. 76 patents, $36 million in investment, and we still haven't got it to market yet. So you probably heard of BlackBerry. Remember BlackBerry? As a headhunter, I recruited most of their security team that built the business platform for BlackBerry. So new technology that comes to market, cellular networks. I did a lot of engineering recruiting as they were building out networks in the Caribbean, North America. a lot of mining startups, all new technology. So that kind of stuff is, if you don't have kids to distract you, right? You kind of, I'm a workaholic, and I really go deep into the rabbit holes. So that's part of my personal dysfunction.
Well, I don't think it's a dysfunction.
It's also I'm also very irreverent and self-deprecating.
So at that time in 91, you said you were in Peru, or you were
No,
influenced.
I was living with a gal who was from Peru. Now, interesting background. Her father was a French mining engineer, and her mother was more British than the Queen. And her grandfather was in the Indian Army, or in the British side, and then when India got its independence, stayed with the Indian government. So her parents, she was raised in Peru, so she had a sense of entitlement. She was multilingual, really interesting person, and we spent 18 years together before we parted. She managed to get 2 master's degrees, and she's a barista somewhere now.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you visit Ukraine?
I've never been.
There's a question here which probably doesn't necessarily apply because of your mother's, well, maybe it does, partially her French-Canadian background, maybe. How important is your non-Ukrainian parents' culture to you?
My mother taught me to be analytical. My mother's Anglo background, stiff upper lip. You don't ever let them see you cry. Okay. If you're having my father was very good in debating, and he would, on occasion, put 2 of us against each other on a topic, and make sure you have your ducks in a row when you're debating, right? If not, you get kneecapped. My family is very stoic. That comes from my mother's Anglo side. I don't like my aunts they're all Anglo because their French Canadian mother died very young when they were young kids. So I don't think the French Canadian aspect was a big influence on my mom's side. My mom was English, French Canadian mother who died young, and Anglican, I think it was, or United. Sorry, United. So.
I think I've gone through most of the questions here.
Wow, we still have an hour to kill.
No, technically, most of them were an hour. Some of them went to an hour and a half.
Okay.
But you were prepared. I never gave anybody questions beforehand. You're the only person. So.
Well, that'll save you time next
Yeah,
time.
it does. It does. You kind of answered this question, but I'll just pose it. And try not to rock your chair.
You should have told me that before we started. I would have gotten a wooden chair. Usually I have my feet on my desk. Sorry.
Right. Well, I don't know how it started getting distracting. Okay, the question is, what do you like and find helpful about the Ukrainian Canadian community?
Passion for those who are still passionate about it. The sense of collegiality with the people that I hang with. Frustration with those who don't understand the point of view, the Ukrainian point of view. Serious frustration with all the disinformation that's going out there, for years and years with the Russians and everybody else. What I like about it is no matter what, you can starve us, you can bomb us, you could do it, but we'll always manage to survive. What are the first opening words of our anthem, Stand Medalo? That's the ultimate optimist.
Just hold a sec. Hold that thought. Sorry. Um, I heard a strange beep here. Did you ever sing in any choirs?
As a kid, yes, in Oshawa. I also played in Baturin. I also played in the Oshawa. As a kid, we had a a marching band. Well, not so much marching, but we had a band in Oshawa. I was a dancer in Sokola up until around 21 or 22 years of age. So I sucked at sports, so I sat on the bench in the soccer team, but active in everything.
What instrument did you play?
Depending on who you talk to, you had a narvahara and trumpet, flugelhorn, French horn, and baritone. I played a little bit of piano, but my left hand's usually 3 bars behind, so I went to single note instruments.
Hmm.
Also played in a dance band for 4 or 5 years, like a little hack zabava band.
A Ukrainian band.
Of course.
What was the name of the band?
Well, we never really had a name. We just kind of got together.
Mm-hmm. So I sent you a question that I was thinking about, and I mean, there's all these belonging to organizations, and I guess feeling a sense of community. But is there any other way you would describe the meaning of being Ukrainian overall, like in Canada? What does it mean to be Ukrainian in Canada? Or without the in Canada, what does it mean to you to be Ukrainian?
I'm because of my historical connection to the old country from where my Dido and Baba and Pradide were. I, my partner in life can trace her family tree back to 1773. She's Acadian Mi'kmaq background, and still owns a family property that was deeded to her first great whatever Basque sailor to 1734. I cannot trace my family history back past Dido and Baba. I have no sense of family in Ukraine, and for me, there's a sense of resentment that was disconnected. And for me, it's payback. It's payback to something that I've never had.
Oh. You don't have any relatives in Ukraine that could connect?
No. After Dad died, there's been no connection to any family back home.
And you haven't been curious to find them?
My brother had 3 kids. My sister had 5 kids. I don't have kids because my partners and I were always career focused. I don't have any sense of having to propagate the family name. That's been taken care of. Okay, so whatever best that I can contribute is what I can contribute.
Mm-hmm. Do you know of any family traditions, jokes, or stories?
This one you can't put on the video. Okay. Back in the early 60s, or the late 60s, early 70s, my dad had a distant cousin come to visit. This was still Soviet Ukraine. And there was this old Hutzul who was from my dad's selo, Trostyanets, who was living in the States, and he was out of Detroit. So Dad had invited him because this old Hutzul knew my dad's cousin's parents, right? Because they were from the same selo. He came late for dinner. Dad was a little annoyed because, we were waiting, and then we finally had dinner. There's like 10, 12 people for dinner. And he was illiterate, and he spoke broken English, broken Ukrainian. And this is part of the cultural language issues that I became very sensitive about, because I always felt my Ukrainian was inferior until I met my late wife. When I met my late wife, she never spoke to me in English. to get my Ukrainian back. So this old guy comes in, and Dad goes, "What happened? Що сталося? Ти спізнився?" And in his broken English Ukrainian, he said, "Я їхав гадо, даров курво, колесо мені трісло, мушу змінити колесо." And I, as an 8 or 9-year-old, go, "Чи то гарна курва була?" And I got smacked across the head for being a smartass. And I go, "Oh, я їхав гадо і даров курво." Okay, I got a car, kurva, curb? No, kurva. So those Molly-propisms are the things that I really enjoy. Another one would be Titam Zadova Sidish, so Zadok, how do you say, Zadok Vishnevi, something like that. So he started mixing up words, right? And so as a kid, that used to be a game for me. And but now the Ukrainian has become so multinational, it's no longer pure, and so I don't get quite the amount of fun out of it as I used to. So I really enjoyed as a kid.
Sorry, what you enjoyed?
The mixing of the languages and like that anecdote that I gave you, and just and part of that was to compensate for my own insecurity with my weakness in my Ukrainian language. Ukrainian was my first language, but then when you went to school, it became less and less so. And then when I left the Hromada in my early 20s, I didn't speak to anybody in Ukrainian for 30 years. And now I'm just finished Toma Trechit Shist of Litopis Upa.
That's unbelievable. I often think I'm going to read it, but it's too daunting.
I've got the entire collection. I'm missing 3 books. I'm trying to get through them all.
How much of it can you retain?
Quite a bit.
Oh,
I'm a history junkie. And then I just read 2 books about the Divizia that was written by from the German Wehrmacht about the Divizia during the war. And then trying to read in English with German and Russian maps, and then trying to Google cross-reference where they were is quite the challenge. So I donated those 2 books to the Research Institute.
You talked about sort of your language skills, and did you ever feel, because I interviewed somebody else from Oshawa, and I think because he wore a ponytail, he was sort of not exactly banned from the community, but often felt that he didn't quite belong.
You're talking about Yarko. Yarko's dad was an anesthesiologist who was in the same hospital as my dad. His mom was German or Austrian, if I remember correctly.
German,
his little brother went to school with my sister, and his name was Taras. So my sister led and Taras in high school were pretty tight. And Yarko's the musician, the sensitive type. I really admire Yarko because in philosophy, Ayn Rand, the writer Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so the two literary characters who I aspire to be is like the Rourke character in Atlas Shrugged. Rugged individualism, you chart your own path regardless of whatever gets in your way, that you're always true to yourself. That's the one character. And the second character for me is Cifuentes' Don Quixote chasing windmills, because it's a glorious thing. No matter how ridiculous it may be, you're in your glory. And Yarko reminds me of me from that point of view. Because devil be damned, he has his passion with his bandura. I haven't seen him I bumped into him once or twice a decade ago when he was busking on Bloor West or on the subway. And if he has a ponytail, who cares? I've got a bald spot, which is giving you that reflection. So Yarko, his dad was rabidly political and didn't care who he talked to about it. And if you were German, Jewish, whatever, non-committal or whatever, he would push the Ukrainian agenda, right? My dad did the same, but my dad did it more behind the scenes and more from the organizacyjny, providnictva side of it. His mom was a lovely lady. I remember her, but I remember correctly, she made some really, really amazing torte. But the father was the one who was always pushing the Ukrainian stuff. The boys were a little bit more genteel.
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you're talking to him, say hello.
Okay, yeah, I'll probably say hello in the next little while because once the website goes up, which is it's almost up, um, there'll be reactions. um, one
So
more
what?
question.
Okay, but when he just made the comment reactions, what are you expecting?
Well, somebody might not like something, they said and they didn't think we'd put it in. I don't know. Just, I don't know. People are funny. Not that there's anything like that at all. I mean, I'm sure everybody will think, ever so far, people on the board of directors think it's wonderful. So I'm not really concerned. But
Well, I'll tell you one last little anecdote. When I came back to Oshawa, I went for a meeting for at the hall, and the old guys decided that they wanted to sell the place because Denashitita, that was the theme. And I said, no, we're not selling. And they go, well, who the hell are you? And I go, I'm Steph Ostafichuk. And everybody said, we thought you were dead. We haven't heard from you for 30 years. And I said, well, give me a month. I physically called, as a headhunter, called up all the people who I grew up with and said, we're having a meeting, pay your dues. We're taking over the hall administration and we're going to keep the place running. So I actually literally moved back from Toronto to Oshawa, which did not do my career any good, but we kept the hall going for 8 more years till we sold it and put the money into trust. But yeah, so there's there's certain points in your life like you kind of, my life and career has been like a pinball in a pinball machine. You go in one trajectory and all of a sudden some circumstance knocks you into another trajectory.
mm-hmm.
But again, like the Rourke character or the Quixote character, it doesn't matter as long as you follow your path. That's what I'm doing here. This place gives me purpose, and that's what being Ukrainian does. It's giving me purpose. That's the bottom line for me.
So getting Veselka organized is your purpose.
My purpose with Veselka, and I don't have kids. My wife never had children, but she was very actively involved in SUM all her life, as were her brother and sister, and who still are, by the way. Her mother was Holovaja Noche Liga for 20 years. Her name was Pani Stelmach, Miroslava Stelmach. For me, to go back to that comment, Denashitita, without a camp for a kids organization, you don't have an organization. So for me, the line is in the sand. The best that I can do is to raise money and maintain this place. We have a brand new $1 million kitchen. We have a renovated wooden chapel with copper on it that the Cardinal Schlippe Prisvyatil back in 72 or 73. We just spent $900,000 rebuilding a 50-year-old Olympic pool. We're putting in a new playground. And we're doing all this. Well, the kitchen was done 4 years ago, but everything we've done was all done during COVID. And without camp this year, we're raising money so that we can keep the camp going. But bez taboru, bez detay, nemає organizacji. It's very Darwinian.
How long have you been the hospodar?
November 1st, I started my 3rd year. I'm into my 3rd year. But keep in mind, we had a 400-acre farm growing up. And so I went from the farming into the forestry, into Central America, agriculture and forestry, to Young and St. Clair, Young and Rosedale, to Lakeshore and Burlington, back to the country. So I've gone full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when are you going to Ukraine?
I don't think I want to.
Okay.
The reason being, again, with a certain vision in your mind. Okay, so from an idealistic point of view, or maybe perhaps I'm locked in a historical mindset that no longer exists. most of my friends have been 2 or 3 or 4 times, and everybody wants to, they said you should go. It's a beautiful country. I've got 29 countries in my passport. I've seen beautiful countries,
Mhm.
right?
But this is your heritage.
Heritage does not have to be geography. Heritage can be what's in your heart and what's in your head. What's the saying that they say when Ukrainians, after the war, died and they were buried in? I'll tell you one other anecdote. Really. You know how they say it in Ukrainian when they toss the dirt on the coffin, at the very end of a ponacheda, or at the end of the burial, so that Zemля bula lehche для вас. My grandparents died and were buried in an Anglo-Catholic cemetery. When they opened up the Ukrainian Catholic cemetery, my father had them transferred, reinterred into St. Volodymyr and Olya Svinta in Oshawa. Що вони лежали на українську землю. So that's the kind of stuff that resonates with me. I have no interest to go and get, go party and to go hardy and everything else. I have no interest in being in a tour bus. And
No, you don't. I guess because you don't have family.
I have friends from Oshawa who live in Ukraine, who live in Ukraine, who show us around. But I don't want to. I have a certain image, and again, it's the Don Quixote thing.
Well, considering your father was so active in the UPA.
Well, Dad wasn't so much active in the UPA. He helped out when he could. He was in Prosvita, and Trostyanets was a hotbed for OUN and Upilci during the war, right up through. That Dido and Bob and Dad ended up as forced labor in Germany, but Dad kept his parents with him, and they had to leave, so that was the best of the worst options.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm good.
You're good?
I'm just worried that my comments don't come out of stand-up comedy.
Well, we need some comic relief on this website.
Okay.
But I mean, in essence, your mother made the choice to bring you up being Ukrainian.
No. Dad was always adamant that we were Ukrainian. When my mother was pregnant with my oldest brother, and they were talking about what do you want to name the child if it's a boy, my dad said Gregory, and Mom goes, why Gregory? And that's the name of my murdered brother, was Greg. And Mom said it's the first time you ever mentioned your brother was just before the christening. Okay. Mom joined Dad because of Dad's passion and what he did in the Ukrainian Armada. Mom became equally as passionate, and Mom was very, very efficient. Because she had a little bit of higher education, Mom got the Ukrainian organizations involved in Canadian politics when we were still considered ghettoized, off the boat people, DPs. Okay, it's still in the 60s, and that helped in a long way to add extra power to the Ukrainian lobby group. Not just under Cook, but other organizations that are part of Cook, that took us out of our own cultural ghetto, political ghetto, and into the Canadian community. So mom brought a lot of power to the table, but she was a total convert to the Ukrainian community.
That's very unusual.
I know of a handful. That's it. And then after Dad died, Mom met up with an old high school sweetheart and then left the community, moved out west to be with her family. So Mom actually had 27 years with my dad and 26 years with my stepdad. So it's not too often somebody could be lucky twice in love.
So which Canadian organizations did she lobby?
Well, my mother was on the national executive of the what the hell is it called now? Sorry. National Executive. Let me get the National Council of Women. Sorry.
Right.
National Council. She was on a national executive. That was at the time of, way back when Michael Starr was Minister of Labor under Diefenbaker. Then after that, right up through Trudeau, and they were lobbying for, civil liberties and things like that. This was not a Ukrainian thing. This was a national women's organization. Okay.
Yeah, Judy Rebick was a big star during that time.
Yeah. And so we used to use our dining room table with a gestetner. We'd be doing laps around the table, making folders and pamphlets and conference reports and stuff like that. So Mom was very active with that. Pani Shkambara and Pani Zavarucha? You know those names? Well, they're my mom's generation. And those two ladies with my mom were very active in that. They actually went to Kenya and Argentina on some women's conferences. And part of what Mom did was help to bring the women's organizations into some of those national things.
That's excellent. Yeah, she was a real go-getter.
Yeah. But not necessarily the front and center, but right beside Dad, and she had her own motivations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's great. We got lots of material, and it was interesting to meet you. Fascinating. You're a very busy man.
Well, there's one of two things. If I'm not busy, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way.